started because we
Sure.
have a lot of people who showed up, so everyone's not waiting. But like I said, if anyone comes in, I'll just let them in. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Ezra Santana. I go by any pronouns, and I'm the membership coordinator at the Community Sector Network of PEI. Welcome everyone to Employment and Human Rights with Sean Pervez, that I just learned to pronounce his last name.
You did well.
I would like to start by making a land acknowledgement. Epeque, Prince Edward Island, is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The Epequenoa Mi'kmaq have occupied this island for over 12,000 years. We honor the treaties of peace and friendship, which recognize Mi'kmaq rights and establish an ongoing relationship between nations. This meeting is being recorded. We'll put it up on our Community Sector Network YouTube channel. I will be sending links to everyone who is here today and to the people who also couldn't make it. So you folks can access that afterwards. And now I'll be introducing our speaker. Sean Pervez is the Community Outreach and Education Officer for the PEI Human Rights Commission. He's new to PEI, having been a librarian for 9 years in Ontario and a public school teacher for a decade in British Columbia. He's committed to promoting justice and tolerance and helping all Canadians live their best lives in this country. If anyone has any questions, you can feel free to chime in, use the raise your hand button, put it up in the chat. I'll keep an eye on that for everyone. And yeah, I'll just pass it on to Sean.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Ezra. Hello, everybody. Before I begin, I'm just going to ask for some patience because I haven't used Zoom in over a year. I use Teams typically, so hopefully there won't be any kind of like major disasters. Hopefully I won't accidentally shut everything down. Okay, so far so good. Bear with me, friends. Already we're having a bit of an issue here. Hold on one sec. Sorry, folks, just bear with me. While I'm doing my technical difficulties here, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. As Ezra so kindly said, I was a public school teacher. I was a librarian. And it was actually being a librarian that really inspired me to go into human rights work because I was seeing a lot of people that were coming into my library in rough shape, I'll say. Their rights were being violated and they didn't really have anyone to stick up for them. Okay, looking good, looking normal. All right. So I saw all these people, typically elderly people, unhoused people, people with disabilities. They were coming to us for help. And it really opened my eyes to these marginalized communities out there that really need support. And so when I moved to PEI, this job came up and I applied for it and they gave it to me. Lucky you. So I just want to repeat what Ezra said. There's kind of two ways I do these presentations. The first way is I just talk at you, which I'm totally fine with doing. I'm very comfortable just yammering on. But I'm also open to interruptions and questions as I go, because I know through experience talking to people and doing these presentations that I might bring up a concept that sort of triggers a thought or a memory that's related to your workplace. And you might want to discuss it on the spot, and I'm fine with that. I actually find that makes, that kind of enriches the whole experience. So please, please, please don't hesitate to chime in with questions or comments. Also clarifications. If I use a word or a expression that you're not quite sure of, please stop me and ask for clarification. Really, I'm here for you. Every group I meet with has sort of different interests and different demands. This presentation I'm going to do today is a little bit more focused on employment, employer-employee relations, but I'm also going to tell you a little bit about what the Commission does and what you can expect from us. Okay. So what I hope to cover, again, it depends on time and it depends on if there are things that are more pressing. I want to tell you what we do specifically. And then I also want to cover what rights are actually covered under the Human Rights Act. There are some misconceptions about what your rights are according to the law. And then I also want to talk about what discrimination means, again, as it relates to the law, because we do get a lot of people that call us feeling bad, something bad has happened to them, and they're not really sure what it is, and they think it's discrimination, and then they call us, and it turns out, no, it was just somebody doing something bad to you, and maybe there's someone else that could help you other than the Commission. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit, and then I'm going to talk about what we've referred to as the duty to accommodate, and that is employers' duty to, and schools' duties and services to accommodate people with disabilities usually, but sometimes there's other things that come in as well. So yeah, I'm going to touch on all those things. A couple of more things before I begin. I just want to stress that I am not a lawyer. So what I'm talking to you about today is not actually legal advice. It's been compiled and put together with the lawyers that work here. But the things I say, you can't, yeah, it's not real lawyer speak. I also want to tell you, to explain that the Commission is committed to being as objective as we possibly can. So some people think that we are an advocacy group, that we advocate for certain portions of the population. And that's not entirely true. We advocate just the law. All we really care about is that the law is being followed. And so if there is one group that is being discriminated against and the law is being violated, we definitely will step in. But you most likely wouldn't see us at a protest or anything like that. It's really, really important for the Commission to be as objective as possible. Okay. So just a tiny bit of background before we move forward. And the reason I bring this up is can be some confusion. The PEI Human Rights Act is a separate entity to the UN Declaration of Human Rights. The UN Declaration happened post-World War II, when allies saw what was happening to the Jewish population, for example, or the LGBTQ population. The allies kind of got together and decided, you know, every human has a right to certain things. They have a right to dignity and they have a right to equality. And they came up with this list of 30 points, articles that talk about what every person should have a right to just by nature of being a human being. It's a really great document. I encourage everybody to have a look at it, but it's not really the law, not here. Our Human Rights Act is inspired by it, as is most other human rights acts currently, but no, it's not really bound to law and PEI. So there are things like, you know, the right to clean water, the right to seek asylum, the children's right to play, you know, the right to only get married if it's consensual, things like that. They're very difficult to like apply a law to on a daily basis. So we use all that to sort of inspire what we're going to do in the Act. The Act came along in the 70s. And I will point out that each province has its own Human Rights Act. So what I talk about today is going to be a little bit different than what you might experience if you move to Alberta, for example. Although we're very, very similar. There's just slight differences in the law and slight differences in how it's enforced. And then finally, there's also a Canadian Human Rights Act. And the difference there is the Canadian one just covers anything federal. So if you experience discrimination, say on the ferries here, which I believe are federally owned, let's just say they are for the sake of argument. If you experienced, discrimination on a federally owned vessel, you would have to take your claim to the Canadian Human Rights Commission, not the PEI Human Rights Commission. And I'll also clarify that you don't have to be a citizen to be protected by the Act. You don't have to have residence here. All that's required to be protected is just that you're here. So people coming off the cruise ships are protected once they're on PEI. This is very important if you work with newcomers or temporary foreign workers, because they often are under the impression that they don't have the same rights as citizens. And that's just not true. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we do. First, I'll explain a really important part of who we are, and that is we don't really deal directly with the provincial government. So they fund us, and we are responsible to show them how we're spending the money, which we do in an annual report. But outside of that, they don't have any interactions with our day-to-day business. We have a board of commissioners and a chair, and they're the ones that keep us accountable and make sure that we're doing the job properly. When I bring this up to high school kids or college students, I often ask them, why do you think it's important that we're separate from the provincial government? Separate entity. And there's two reasons, really. And there's probably more, but the way I see it, two really good reasons. The first and most obvious one is it's to prevent any type of meddling or any type of favoritism. If we were beholden to one or two people for our funding, that would open the door towards possible abuse of the situation. So there's that. But the other reason, to be perfectly honest, is there are a lot of claims against the provincial government and government employees. So I'm not just talking about politicians, nurses, police officers, prison guards. And so it's really important for those claims to just stay contained within our offices. Every claim that comes through here, actually, really, any conversation we have with anybody is confidential, to the point where we don't even bring files out of the office usually. If we do, it's a really big deal. It makes it difficult because I can't go home and vent at the end of the day like I used to, because I can't really talk about any of the stuff we're experiencing. All I'm allowed to complain about is like the coffee maker being broken or something. But we're all very committed to the confidentiality thing here. So there can be some fear, again, I see it a lot with newcomers and temporary foreign workers, that there's going to be some kind of retaliation if they come and speak to us. And so we try really hard to make people understand that no one else is going to know about this. And certainly we're not going to, rat you out to your employer or to the government or something like that. Any questions so far? Normally when I give presentations in person, I leave about 7 to 11 seconds for somebody to respond. But because it's being recorded, I'm not going to leave quite that much time. So you got to be quick on the trigger if you want to question or
Sorry.
comment.
We had somebody ask a question about accommodation policies, so I don't know if you want to wait until you get to that portion.
Yeah, we'll be getting to the accommodation. Yeah,
Sounds good.
yeah. I might move a little bit faster. Accommodation is near the end. I might move faster through the front part so we can get to that. Because there tends to be a lot of questions around accommodation, and it's tricky. There's not a lot of black and white answers there. We spend a lot of our time in the gray here. Okay, so what do? There's three things that are our mandate. Number one, and the big one, is we investigate complaints of discrimination. I'll tell you a little bit more about what discrimination means, but essentially it's treating somebody poorly based on or because of certain characteristics. So if I were to go to Tim Hortons and order a coffee and the manager refused to serve me because I'm from British Columbia, that would be discrimination based on where I'm from. If they refused to serve me just because they didn't like the look of my face, that's just poor business practice, but it's not actually discrimination. So we investigate complaints. We educate. So that's my job. I go out to businesses, schools, high schools, universities, trade school, whoever really needs my help. I speak with a lot of human resources departments about accommodation, actually. And so it's really important to us to get knowledge out there and understanding of how the Human Rights Act works, but also what exactly rights are and how do you exist with other people who also have rights. And the third thing is we advise the government about human rights issues. So for example, there's some legislation, I think, going through about service animals. So they spend a lot of time talking with our executive director about what, the issue is people saying an animal is a service animal and they're not. So how can we check that but still keep people's rights in mind and all that kind of stuff? It's very complicated. I'm glad I'm not part of the discussion because it seems very difficult. So that's our threefold mandate there. So if you do experience discrimination, so if you are treated poorly based on certain characteristics, which I'll be getting to, you can come and make a complaint. The first step, it would be intake. So intake is when people call or email, and often they're not really sure if they've been discriminated against. They just know something bad has happened and they don't know what to do about it. So we will talk to people and we'll listen to them. And during the intake process, we determine if we're the right people to help them. So, if you got evicted for no good reason, that's, unless it's because of your skin color or religion, that's just a poor landlord, and that would be a different organization that would help with that. And we would sort of steer people that way. We also help people decide if this is really what they want to do, if it's going to give them the results that they're looking for. A lot of people call us or email in a state of distress and anger, and a lot of times they want revenge. And that's not really what we're looking for. We don't really take a punitive approach. Mediation is what we're interested in. Sometimes there is a little bit of punitive action taken, but really all we want is for the discrimination to stop and for people to learn what it means to exist in a world where we don't discriminate. So that's the intake portion. If you were to call in or come in, I might do part of the intake process. Because as the education officer, this might be a point where I step in and tell them all about the commission and what they can expect to happen next. Okay, once we've done intake, if it's determined, yep, this is probably going to be a complaint, like a legitimate complaint, we would pass that off to investigation. And then begins this long process of we take this story of the person making the complaint, and then we also take the story of the person who, or entity who the complaint was made against, and we listen to both sides. And the investigators examine evidence and testimony and try to figure out exactly what happened. Sometimes this is very, very quick. Sometimes it takes a very, very long time. The way the process is now, anytime there's a level of communication between the two parties, they're given 30 days to respond. And so that can take a really long time if people are responding back and forth. Sometimes it can be resolved really quickly. We had somebody a while ago that made a complaint that she had been dismissed, that she'd been fired because she was the only woman working at this business. And when we investigated, it was true, she was the only woman. But they said, no, we fired her because she's been harassing a couple of our employees. And here's 15 minutes of video evidence of her harassing different people. And she was screaming in people's faces. She was, there was one person she made cry. So she felt like she was discriminated against, but in reality, she just was not working out as an employee there. So that one we resolved really, really quickly. That would have been dismissed. If we can't, we usually try to mediate in this middle area. If we can't, then we send it to what we call a panel, which is where we have some of our commissioners sitting in our boardroom. We have both parties, and the commissioners just make a decision. And from what I understand, with the panels, usually both parties are unhappy. So we really try to mediate as much as possible when we can. Okay. Any other questions? I purposely went really quickly there. Any other questions about our operations? If not, I'm going to move into some definitions and then accommodation. You can also bring up questions at any time as I'm talking. Okay. Right. So before I continue any further, I don't think it's as necessary for this particular group, but one of the things I stress is there's no hierarchy of rights. So there's no rights that are more important than others. And sometimes two groups' rights might clash, and there might not be like a really simple solution. And well, there kind of is a simple solution, to be honest, and that is in Canada, it's a really important concept to let people believe what they want, even if it's not what you believe, as long as they're not acting on it in a violent way or a way that infringes on anyone. We really have to just sometimes learn to just tolerate. Question?
Nancy's asking how many times letters go back and forth.
Good question. It depends on the party. Yeah, there's no simple answer to that. I've seen files where there's been, 5 or 6 letters back and forth. It depends on so many things. It depends on testimonials. It depends on what kind of evidence people are submitting. Sometimes people submit more evidence in the middle, and then we have to let both parties talk about the new evidence. Great question, though. But you're going to hear a lot of this from me today. It depends. That's my boss's favorite phrase, is it depends. The nature of our work is such that it's rarely black and white. It's rarely cut and dry. And we often have to spend a lot of time in discussion the lawyers sort of figuring out, okay, what do we do with this? What's the right thing to do? We've never experienced this before. So yeah, it's a really roundabout way of saying it really depends. Ideally, you'll only want like maybe 2 to 4 letters back and forth. But because it's legal work, everything needs to be in writing. So yeah. Okay. So discrimination. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So there's 2 sides to discrimination. There's more depth than that, but essentially 2 sides. Most people understand the concept of discrimination being treating somebody differently or poorly based on one of these characteristics, but it's also discriminatory to treat everybody the same when they need different things. So the most visible and obvious reference I can make is wheelchair accessibility ramps. If a building only has stairs to get in, that's discriminatory. Not everybody can access that service now. Okay. Another example would be a student who has some kind of learning disability. And if the school does not make efforts to accommodate that learning disability, that's discrimination, because every child is entitled to the same education here. And so if a child's not getting the proper education because they're dyslexic, that's discriminatory. There are things you can put in place to make that happen. Okay. It's discriminatory. I'll circle back to this one, but if you have a huge company like Walmart, we'll say, it's discriminatory to expect somebody to work on an important religious holiday. Even if most of the other staff don't adhere to that religion, religion is covered, and so they have the right to participate in their religious holiday. Now, there are exceptions. The size of the operation really matters. But I'll talk about that a little bit more as I go. So yeah, treating everyone the same when they need different things. And this one tends to really surprise the young men out there that I teach. Intent. You can discriminate even if you don't mean it. So the defense, I was only joking, does not fly here, ever. It was a misunderstanding. No. All we care about is the person that received it and how they felt, within reason. But yeah, you can absolutely discriminate without meaning to. A short example of that, we had, there was a restaurant and the entire serving staff was female. They had been working together for quite a long time. And in their workplace culture, they consensually all agreed that it was okay to slap each other on the butt. That's not that unusual if you've ever coached sports events. As long as everyone's okay with it and is verbalized, yeah, I'm all right with being touched or whatever, that's fine. So they hired somebody new and with the intent of trying to welcome her into their workplace culture, somebody smacked her on the butt. And she had a very, very intense reaction. Apparently she was throwing things around, kicking things, swearing. She left, would not go back to work, would not answer anybody's emails or phone calls or texts, and then came to us with the complaint. So when we met with them, the restaurant, and we talked about it, they were very sorry and like they were in tears. It turns out that the person that had the reaction actually had been sexually assaulted at some point in their life, and so was not comfortable being touched at all without consent. And so there was a lot of tears and a lot of apologies and things like that. So that's an example of a people with actually, somewhat good intentions just poor execution of accidentally discriminating. I'm actually guilty of accidental discrimination. When I was at the library, I worked there for about 4 years before somebody came in and said, you know what, like these 2 aisleways are not wide enough for a wheelchair. And I just about fell over because I thought they were, but I didn't bother to measure. So we had to sort of restructure how we did that area of the library. Okay, so we're going to talk specifically about what discrimination is according to us, according to the law. What's really important is in order for it to be considered discrimination, it has to happen in a certain area, and it needs to involve grounds or characteristics is the word I like to use, a little more user-friendly. Yeah.
We have a question about good resources for policy development, templates, that kind of stuff. I don't know if you would rather leave that for.
I'll probably leave that to the end. But what I would say is your best bet is to contact us first. Because we do have a lot of resources that aren't sort of out there publicly right now. But yeah, definitely, especially if there's something in particular that you're curious about, contact us and then we can put together a package for you or something like that. But we get a lot of people that have policy concerns.
Sounds helpful.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question about this person says one property management company moved upstairs.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing this person said is that they can't walk up those stairs, and you wouldn't be accessible to somebody in chairs.
Mm-hmm.
So they're asking if it would fall under discrimination.
Yeah, that would be discrimination. But again, it's tricky. It depends. Businesses are required to accommodate, but we understand that, if you have a business of 3 people, you can't afford to put an elevator in your business. I recently was dealing with a business actually that had this exact problem. They had offices in the 2nd floor. It was an older building downtown Charlottetown. They couldn't afford to make any changes to it. So what we ended up doing as a solution is having a temporary space they could use on the ground floor for any time there's somebody with accessibility issues. So I thought that was a pretty clever sort of way of responding to it. And they also offered to go to people too, which I thought was very generous. Okay, carry on, or we got more?
No, the same person just mentioned that it's an old building, probably the same company.
Not the same company, but yeah, old buildings. Yeah, it's a real issue for downtown Charlottetown, and there's also not a lot. There's not ramps into every building, and apparently it's just causing nightmares for a lot of different people out there. Carry on.
We have a longer write-up.
Mm-hmm.
I've often come across cases of mistreatment at work by employers, leading to burnouts or depression among employees who are often immigrants and vulnerable. These cases are known to boards of directors, and incessant turnovers are significant evidence of such behavior. Yet the managers in question are never called into question, and the pattern repeats itself over and over again without anyone daring to speak out or take the matter seriously. What can be done to finally find answers and help?
What can be done is the employees need to reach out to us. And I know this is particularly troublesome for newcomers and temporary foreign workers because they don't want to upset anybody. They don't want to lose their job. They often have a lot of pressure on them to stay in that work. If they're temporary foreign workers, they can't go anywhere else. So that we run into a great deal of fear from newcomers. We know they're being mistreated, but we can't do anything unless people come to us. If you make complaints to us, then we can step in and start holding those businesses accountable. But the trick is trying to give people the courage to come to us. This is why I keep, at the beginning, I stress that we're not part of the provincial government, that we're confidential. Another thing that you'll find is we believe everybody when they first come in until proven otherwise. So no one's going to be gaslit. We're not going to like you would never hear somebody here say like, that's not a big deal. Everything is a big deal to us. So yeah, that's what's got to be done is the people who are experiencing this, they need to come to us. Yeah. Is that a satisfying enough answer?
I think, yes, this person responded, thank you. But if folks feel like the answers weren't exactly what they were looking for, they would like to ask clarification questions, like you can feel free to add it in the chat and I'll bring it up.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk specifics here. We had somebody who came in not too long ago. They were upset, they got a job. And when they went to sort of serve a job, they sat down with the owner of the place and the owner said, if you want to work here, you can't have blue hair. And so the person came to us, I've been discriminated against because of my appearance. And we had to tell them, that's terrible, but that's actually not discrimination according to the law. Fashion choices are not protected. Now, if she was some part of some religion that required blue hair, then there could be an argument that like she's been discriminated against based on religion. We actually did have a case like this, not similar to this, where somebody, they didn't hire someone because they had tattoos. And it turned out their tattoos were actually part of their religious belief system. Okay. Now, often when I tell this, the hands go up. We research that kind of stuff. We don't just believe, I said we automatically believe your story, but we're going to fact check things. So if you come in and tell us there's a blue hair religion and you're being prevented from expressing it, we're going to look into that. All right, so carrying on. The places where you're protected on the island are specific. So you're protected in your place of employment, any place that's open to the public. So any store, library, buses, anywhere where, public are expected to be able to access freely. When you rent or buy something, usually it's apartments. You're also covered when it comes to memberships, volunteering, and of course we can't have public displays of discrimination as well. What's missing from this list? Some people get it right away. Sometimes it takes a minute. What's missing is your home. So I won't dwell on this too much because I'm a lawyer and I often get bombarded with scenarios that I'm not quite qualified to answer to. But essentially, when I tell high schoolers this, they're kind of shocked and like, oh, it's terrible. But the truth is, I don't think we want the government coming into our homes with this kind of stuff. You're allowed to believe what you want. As long as you're not infringing on somebody else, your home is your private property. You can't have anything discriminatory facing the public, but if you wanted to listen to music with racialized lyrics or something, you have that freedom here, just not outside the home. And so often people are like, what? You mean if I was over at my friend's house and they were discriminating against me, you wouldn't do anything? And the answer is no, because you can leave. But public spaces are there for everybody. So if you're at someone's house for Christmas dinner or whatever, and they say something offensive, you can just get up and leave. You don't have to be there. You don't have to stay. So the home is where it's not really covered. So what do you think our most common area that we get complaints about is? Employment. The vast majority of complaints we get have to do with employment. Although we are starting to see an uptick in rentals, apartment rentals. People getting evicted unfairly or people refusing to rent. And typically, honestly, it's usually connected to children, having children. So you're not allowed to refuse rental if somebody has children. Okay. So these are the grounds. Grounds is the legal term. I often use characteristic. So you cannot treat somebody poorly based on any of these. Okay. So based on their age, based on the color of their skin, their creed. Creed is a belief system. It's very similar to religion. I looked up the definition and it's really wishy-washy. I think it's just to make sure that all belief systems are covered under the Act. Disability, ethnic or national origin, and I would even add place of origin, because you can discriminate against people in your same province or in your same country. Family status, gender expression, gender identity. I often get a question, what's the difference? Gender identity is who you know you are. Gender expression is how you express it to the world. Political belief, your race, your religious beliefs. Sex is almost its own category because we deal with sexual harassment and pregnancy, and those are so, the sexual harassment portion is so huge. We actually have an educator that only does that. So yeah, that's a whole other thing. If you want to know more about the sexual harassment things, her name's Sarah. I would highly encourage you to contact her. I'm not really going to go into it that much because I'll be talking for the rest of the presentation. Sexual orientation, of course, who you're attracted to, source of income, and marital status. One of these grounds is somewhat exclusive to PEI. Give you a chance to kind of give it another gander there and think which one you think it might be. If you've been on the island for a while, you probably can guess. I wasn't here for it. Obviously, I haven't been here that long. But one thing that's fairly unique to PEI is political belief. And apparently, there was a time when you know, the Liberals would sweep the whole island, and then 4 years later, the Conservatives would sweep the whole island, and they would fire everybody that the Liberals hired, even if they weren't necessarily Liberal themselves. They were just working for them. And then the Liberals would come back in and fire all the Conservatives, and it was going back and forth, and it was really toxic. And really bad for the province. So they had to put this in as well. That's the story I'm told anyway. Okay. Alberta has a ground that is ancestry, which I thought kind of interesting. You can't be discriminated against based on who your father is. Okay. Any questions about these? I'm sure there's one or two.
I have a question myself. I don't know if this is going to be obvious for folks, but I'm curious to hear what happens when someone's political or religious beliefs are in and of themselves discriminatory of things in regards to other people. Like, if that makes sense.
As long as they don't act on them, they can believe what they want. Yeah. Yeah, we have to let people be able to believe what they want. even if we think it's dangerous or abhorrent or whatever words you want to use. So yeah, people can believe whatever they want politically or philosophically. It's just how they act on it.
So like say they owned a business. I feel like there are like so many stories of this, particularly in the US, I feel like, which is definitely different. But say somebody owns a business and they refuse to serve somebody who is, I don't know, like a queer couple.
Mhm.
And their defense is that it's their religious beliefs.
Oh no, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so that would be two different conflicting rights, right? Normally we would say it depends, but you don't have that freedom of religion in Canada to refuse service to people, to anybody. So yeah, and we do get that, by the way. And that's part of why I do what I do, is to help clarify this, because yeah, there's a lot of rhetoric, especially coming out of the States, that's promoting discriminatory actions under the umbrella of political or religious beliefs. And at least in Canada, according to the law right now, that doesn't fly.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem. By the way, there's no such thing as parental rights legally. That was okay. That's a whole other thing
Yeah,
I
but that's
will open up.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
sure.
So again, this is why I do what I do, because there's a ton of misinformation, and there are people. I can tell you this: there are people on PEI that are actively trying to deceive other people about what their rights are. I won't go into it much further than that, but it is out there and it is happening. Okay, so you're also protected by association. So if I went to the opening of the Hindu temple, I'm not Hindu, but I want to go to the temple and just be there for the event. And then I'm going to pick on Tim Hortons today. So then I go to Tim Hortons and the owner says, well, no, we don't serve Hindus here or anybody that would go to that event. That would be discrimination towards me. I could file a complaint, even though it's not the religion that I adhere to. Okay. You're also protected if you file a complaint or if you give evidence. So this is to protect against retaliation. And finally, there is some limited protection if you have a criminal conviction. This mainly applies to employment, but sometimes accommodation. So you can't discriminate against somebody purely because they have a criminal conviction. This happens a lot on PEI. You can if it's justifiable. Okay, so if I have a long history of shoplifting and I apply to drive a school bus, that is a tough relationship there. I don't really see how those two would be problematic. But if I had a number of drunk driving convictions recently and I applied to drive a school bus, they would be within their rights to say, no, this is, if you have a lot of drug convictions, they're not going to let you work in a pharmacy. So there are some reasonable areas there. And, once again, I just want to reiterate that we spend a lot of time in gray areas. So we take every case as its own. Okay. So what of all those characteristics, what do you think the most common characteristic is that we get complaints about? By far, the most common complaints that we get have to do with disability. So disability and employment, they're huge. often in bringing in accommodation as well. I do want to say, though, that I haven't been in the job long enough, but I think our statistics are a little bit misleading. I suspect that there probably is more racism than we are getting complaints for. Because, as I was saying earlier, maybe they're afraid, maybe they don't think anything is going to happen. Whereas, disability is not really like a really incendiary kind of topic, right? Racism, religion, gender, those can really bring up a lot of strong emotions in people, and that might prevent them from coming to see us. That's my suspicion. But for now, disability. And it is a big problem. It's a big problem of employers, firing employees with a disability or not accommodating them properly. We deal with a whole lot of that stuff. Okay. So I've talked a little bit about what we do, the basics of how we sort of handle complaints, what discrimination means according to the law. When somebody makes a complaint to us, the first thing we do, well, actually, I do it in the intake process, is we do the Moore test. Every human rights group in Canada follows the same test. It actually came out of BC. First thing we ask is, does the person have a characteristic that's listed in the Act? It's weird wording because everybody does. Everyone has a place of origin. Everybody has an age. Everyone has a color to their skin. But yeah, that's the wording. So did they experience something negative? And was the characteristic the reason or a factor for their negative experience? Okay. And then we often put a fourth question. We call them respondents. So we've got the claimant who comes in and makes the complaint, and then we've got the respondent. Can the respondent justify their actions? So once again, we believe a person when they come in, but we really don't come to any type of decisive anything until we've heard from the other party, because often they can justify what they've done. As I was saying with that example with the woman who thought she was discriminated against. Okay. So let's see the Moore test in action. Okay. So New Year's, CJ of Tignish arrived at his Charlottetown hotel to check into his room. Despite his reservation, he was turned away. When he asked why, the answer was, because you're from Tignish. So we ask ourselves, this is based on a true story, by the way. Again, before my time, but I've looked into it. Does CJ have a characteristic? Yes, place of origin. Did he experience something adverse? Yeah, he was refused his room. Was the characteristic a factor? Yes, the person actually said, you're not allowed in here because you live in Tignish. Now, obviously, this example is very simple. There's a lot of discrimination that people aren't overt about, but our investigators are pretty good at sort of digging through to find the truth. And then finally, could the hotel justify the discrimination? I looked into it, and apparently the justification was there had been some young folks from Tignish there earlier, and they had sort of destroyed their hotel rooms. And so the hotel owner was basically saying everyone from Tignish is like these people, which is bias, right? It's discrimination. I haven't been to Tignish much, but I'm sure there's lots of good people there. All right, let's look at, I'm going to show you two more and then we'll move on. So Cole is a student who's deaf. He's got implants. He uses sign language to communicate. He's unable to receive the education he needs in sign language and is very far behind the other students academically as a result, even though it's proven that he's a bright learner or bright student. So does he have a characteristic? Yeah, he's deaf. That's disability. Did he experience an adverse impact? Yes, he's not getting the same education as all the other kids in his class. That's discrimination. Was a characteristic, protected characteristic, a factor? Yes. He's not getting the education he deserves because he has a disability. Is there a justification? As a former public school teacher, I would have loved to hear them try to make a justification, because I know there's all kinds of things you could do to support Cole. Probably if this was a real situation, the school is trying to save money. Yeah. Anyway, this would be discrimination, and we would get in there, and the school would be responsible to prove to us that Cole is getting the proper education. Yeah. Okay. Jin, a recent newcomer to Canada, has worked at her job for a month. At her first monthly performance review, Jin's manager calmly tells her the way she's not meeting expectations. Jin leaves the review feeling humiliated and offended. So in this case, does Jin have a protected characteristic? Yeah, she has a few. Newcomer, gender, who knows? We'll go with the newcomer, seems to be the big one here. Did she feel something? Did she experience something adverse? Yeah. She had a terrible meeting. She's humiliated. She's offended. Was her characteristic the reason that she feels humiliated and offended? Not in this case, not likely. I mean, of course, we would dig into it more, but if everything here was exactly the truth, Jin is upset. Maybe the manager, it says calmly, but maybe the manager rose their voice. But performance reviews, counseling, discipline, they're not harassment, they're not discrimination. People feel sometimes like they've been discriminated against, but that's not the case. It's also not discrimination if you have a boss that yells at everybody and loses their temper at everybody. That's just a bad boss. If they only lose their temper at the men, that could be considered discrimination. But if they're universal in their terribleness, it's actually not discrimination. Finally, human rights and employment. Before I continue on, I do want to stress a couple of things. First, there is a 1-year time limit to make a claim. So you have up to 1 year after the incident to make a claim. If you wait longer than that, it's no longer valid. So one of the things, and I understand why people would wait, particularly if you've experienced something traumatic like sexual harassment, you might not be ready to go through this. We recommend that you come and talk to us anyway. Again, confidential. We can start a file and then we can pause it until you're ready to come back. Okay. But if you wait 366 days, we cannot accept it. And it's really heartbreaking when people come to us like a little over a year after the event. Okay. It's also important to know that you don't have to do it alone. So you can bring people in with you. If you have a cognitive issue, if you have dyslexia, if you're ESL, if you're a child, you can have somebody fill out the paperwork for you. Okay. Our complaint form is very straightforward. We just ask personal information. We ask who the respondent is, and then we ask for a description of what happened. And then finally, what we ask is, what do you want to happen? So we don't have prescribed outcomes to complaints. We take the complainant, what do you want from this? We talk to the respondent, what are you willing to do about this? Oftentimes, the person making the complaint is not looking for money or anything like that. Often what they want is an apology, a policy change, and a guarantee that it'll never happen again. In some cases, money is involved if somebody misses out on work, or maybe has to pay for counseling or something like that. But each complaint we have has a tailored outcome to what the parties want. So yeah, as long as it's consensual, someone else can fill out the form for you. And we understand that it can be very traumatic to kind of relive events. So that's kind of why we have that in place. Also, we are here to help you with the form. We can't really fill it out for you, but we can sort of guide you if you need some help there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about employment. I think you're starting to get an idea now of how we work to protect people, but just to be very clear, the Act prohibits refusing to hire or firing somebody based on the characteristics, advertising for jobs that exclude certain groups. Now, again, this is within reason. You can't hire a 14-year-old to work in your bar. So you're allowed to advertise for a certain age to work in your bar. If you work at, like a women's shelter, you can definitely hire just women. So generally speaking, you can't exclude groups in advertising, but there are specific cases where it is allowed. You cannot ask discriminatory questions on an application form or in an interview. You can't ask people about their religion. You can't ask them how many kids they have. You cannot ask them about disabilities. You can ask them about their ability to do the job. Okay. So, for example, if the job requires heavy lifting, you can ask the interviewee, can you lift 50 pounds? You need to lift 50 pounds to do the job. Okay. You can ask somebody, trying to think about politically, yeah. You can't really ask much about a person's English ability or how long they've been taking it. But if, for example, they're a frontline worker, you are allowed to expect that they are fluent in English. So there's some things you can and can't ask. We always encourage people to contact us if they're worried. And we can go through the questions with you and say like, yeah, you can ask that, and no, don't touch that at all. But generally speaking, yeah, you don't want to ask anybody about what the nature of any of their illnesses are. Discriminatory terms or conditions. I had mentioned this before, forcing people to work on religious holidays, for example. Different rates of pay for equal work. That's discrimination. Oftentimes at this point in an interview or in the presentation, people ask, how do you prove that? And it can be difficult. There's a lot of discrimination out there that's built into our institutions already. And then there's also very subversive discrimination. But this is all we do. So our investigators are pretty good at kind of figuring out what's really going on. So yes, to summarize, things we deal with: discrimination, difference of treatment, failure to accommodate, which we'll talk about a little bit more. We don't deal with issues of pay. We don't deal with special leave unless, there's some connection if it's religious. Hours of work, overtime, poor management, as I said, general toxicity that's not based on any characteristics. We get a lot of people calling in about toxic workplaces, and we have to kind of talk them through it and like, okay, yes, that's an absolutely terrible thing to say, but did they include your gender or anything? So general toxicity, we don't really deal with so much. Health and safety and wrongful dismissal. There are other organizations that can help out with all this kind of stuff. Okay. We are only concerned about the Human Rights Act and whether or not it's being violated. Okay, one more example. So Wendy's blind. She applies for a job. She's told she will not be hired because she's blind. Has she experienced discrimination? Well, she has a protected characteristic, disability. She's blind. Employment is protected. Yeah, her disability is a factor. They said you can't have the job because you're blind. Is there anything else we need to know about this Wendy situation?
The job she applied for.
Absolutely. I don't want Wendy driving my Uber. I have a lot of faith in blind people to travel through the world, but I'm not sure if I'm ready to get in a car with one, or brain surgery. So it's not discrimination, because if it was one of those jobs, this was the job she was applying for. Hired as a lawyer. Can they justify that? Can you be a lawyer and be blind? You absolutely can. 100% you can be a lawyer and be blind. Most of what they do is just words. There's all kinds of things out there now that can aid a lawyer that's blind. Speech to text, there's all kinds of things. In this case, from what I understand, this is a true story. They didn't want to hire her because there was some travel involved and they would have to pay a driver. If it was a really small business, maybe, but this was a law firm that was quite large. And we were like, you guys can afford this. You can afford to pay someone to drive them out to Summerside or whatever. So in that case, that was discrimination towards Wendy. Whoa. So there's discrimination and then there's harassment. Harassment can be a little bit more insidious. Harassment typically is something that happens over time, although it can be harassment if it happens once. We approach it as it's conduct that demeans, humiliates, or embarrasses a person, and that a reasonable person knows or should know would be unwelcome. Actions, comments, behaviors. It can be a single incident. It can be multiple incidents. We see there are a lot of people that come in and make claims, but only after they've experienced harassment for like months and months, particularly sexual harassment, because there's a lot of shame and embarrassment connected to it. And so it's really important for me to make sure you guys understand, so you can pass it on, that it only has to happen once. And then that's discrimination, harassment, discrimination. Okay. Yeah, you can have harassment that's not connected to a protected ground, but if it is, it's discrimination and we can step in. Again, typically the vast majority of harassment tends to be sexual, but we do see some cultural and religious harassment as well, and gender-based, just generally. Okay, so we're going to talk briefly about duty to accommodate, and this is a really good time for you folks to kind of jump in with your personal experiences if you want some clarification. Generally speaking, we expect employers to follow the duty to accommodate. So you do have some level of responsibility to accommodate your employees if they have, say, a disability. Important little asterisks there, to the point of undue hardship. So we don't have one flat way that we deal with the duty to accommodate, because every business is unique, every business is different. If, as I kind of pointed out earlier, if Walmart hired somebody and they said, you know, I need Saturdays off because of my religion, Walmart is huge. They have a lot of employees. They would be hard pressed to justify to us why they would force that person to work on Saturdays. However, if it was a little gas station owned by mom and pop, and they're getting ready to retire and they don't want to work weekends anymore, and so they put out an ad for somebody to just work weekends, and they hire a person, and then that person says, by the way, I don't work Saturdays, they're within their rights, I believe, to let that person go. A, they don't have any other employees, and B, the job was specifically for Saturday and Sunday. So we really take in the undue hardship. We get a lot of, I get a lot of calls from employers, from human rights, human resources, asking for clarity. I have a really good example that happened recently that focuses on the undue hardship. There was a owner of a restaurant, and they had hired kitchen staff. And once they hired the staff revealed that they had a brain injury, traumatic brain injury. And so this owner said, okay, well, what can I do to help you? That's her duty to accommodate. That is the right way to interact with that person. So one of the issues was this employee had trouble remembering things. And so the employer, I'll be right with you there, I see your hand. The employer created these posters for that employee that outline what goes in the salad, how do you make the soup, that kind of thing. The reason the employer called me is they had just found out that the employee also is in danger of having seizures that aren't treated. So at that point, we kind of tip into undue hardship, because now that employee is a safety hazard. You can't have somebody with seizures that aren't treated yet in a kitchen where there's knives, boiling water, boiling oil. That's dangerous to themselves, to other staff. So in that case, the employer would have been in their rights to let them go until the seizures were treated. They're also, another tactic we would suggest an employer try is give them a different job, but that's the job, the only job that was available. Okay, I saw there was another larger resort actually, where one of their employees got in a terrible accident and ended up in a wheelchair. And what they did is they just moved them to an administrative position. But again, they were a big enough entity that they had that role for them. So that would be another example of duty to accommodate. And I'll get to your question in just a sec. There's also kind of in a sub bracket underneath, the duty to inquire. So if you have an employee that's maybe missing a lot of work or not doing their work properly, acting erratically or strange, something's off, they're not performing the job the way you expected, you have a duty to ask them what's going on before just firing them. Okay, you have to give them a chance. Okay, question.
We have Nancy asking, what happens if somebody, like if an organization or an employer doesn't have any policy?
To accommodate?
Yeah.
Um, well, then they're asking for trouble. Um, a lot of organizations don't really have, like smaller ones don't have the policy spelled out exactly. But I would definitely, if you don't have it, I would recommend putting something in place. Because we get as I had said, the majority of our claims are about employment, and a lot of them have to do with accommodation. And a lot of them are places of employment that are kind of flying fast and loose. So don't have anything on record, don't have a plan for this kind of situation. It's the same with sexual harassment. Your employer needs to have a sexual harassment policy for sure. But yeah, we can't really do much until a complaint is made. Okay, any other questions?
I don't see any in the chat.
Okay.
I had a question. Somebody had a question about a criminal record check request.
Mhm.
It's you're working for someone part-time, and after a few years, you're asked for a criminal record check. And then they say a person has one from 15 years ago. So I didn't quite understand, but I assume they mean somebody else that's also an employee has a criminal record check that's 15 years
Oh,
ago, whereas you're being asked for a new one.
Um, so that's one of those it depends things. There are organizations that are absolutely, it makes sense to do a criminal record check. I have taught in I've taught in 2 provinces. I had to do a criminal record check both times. Vulnerable sector check. Um, so it would really depend on why they want you to do it now after working there for so long. But they're allowed to. And having a 15-year-old criminal record check is a bit of an issue, I would think, too. Yeah, I think it would be a fair request to ask everybody to have theirs up to date if you're going to do that.
This person's clarifying that there was no criminal record check requested at first. I'm a little confused.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Why did they suddenly decide people need criminal record checks? Maybe they were not operating the way they should, and maybe everybody should have gotten a criminal record check. But this also could be some kind of weaponized thing too. If they know someone's got a criminal record and they want them gone, they might use that as a tactic. That's where we come in. You come and talk to us, and we make them justify what they did. All right. Good to go? Or
I think so. Yep.
okay.
Thank you.
So some things that accommodation might look like: flexible work schedule, particularly if somebody has kids, changing job duties, changing workplace policies, so number of sick days. I have a chronic illness. I get chronic migraines. And my boss has accommodated me by letting me, our office is really bright, and sometimes it can be a little bit noisy, and I get very photosensitive. And so when I get really bad migraines, they let me work from home. And that wasn't really an existing policy, I don't think. I mean, there was certainly work from home if you have COVID kind of things, but not so much work from home because there's a lot of discomfort if you come in. So that's an example of how they accommodated me. Changes to the building. We have dimmer lights here. We have, yeah, that's basically it. Making changes to the building is huge. But also, again, it depends on the size of the organization. Modifying workstations. I was really happy. I was in a school yesterday, And one of the kids had a padded chair because they had arthritis. And I was really happy to see that they had accommodated that. Specialized adaptations, assistive devices. An example, if you have a no phones policy, but you have an employee that speaks limited English, you would want to consider allowing them to use Google Translate or a translator app of some kind to assist in their ability to do the job. And I mean, it's not, you can't expect a server, for example, to be using Google Translate for all of their conversations. So that's a little bit different. But if they're in the kitchen staff, for example, and they have limited understanding of English, you should allow them to use a translator so they understand what you're requiring of them to do their job. Service animals as well. This is a big one. Service animals is huge. There's legislation going on. Our general advice when it comes to service animals indoors is first ask yourself, is the animal causing a problem? If they're not, it might just be best to let it be. Second, it's very easy to falsify documents. You can buy the little jackets on Amazon. So it's very easy for people to lie about having a service animal. So you can demand that the animal acts like a service animal. A trained service animal is not going to leave their owner's side. They're not going to bark. They're not going to whimper. They're not going to jump up on anyone. They shouldn't visit anybody ever. There's a whole list of things. You can kind of, yeah. So if they're being disruptive or anything like that, you're within your rights to ask them to leave, even if they say it's a service animal. This is particularly important in restaurants where it can be problematic to have an animal, especially an animal on the loose in your restaurant. Okay, so other examples, I think I've kind of touched on most of these, but just to make sure. So if the accommodation affects health and safety, that's a problem. If the accommodation violates rights of other employees. So there are certain religions that don't tolerate the LGBTQ community. So if you're in a workplace that's catering to one of those religions and that particular viewpoint, that's violating somebody else's rights. And so that wouldn't be considered an accommodation. That would be, yeah, undue hardship. And of course, as I've been stating, if the accommodation affects the financial viability of the enterprise and quantifiable. So if a business tells us they can't afford to build an elevator, we'll ask for quotes. Why can't you? How much do you guys make? How much does the elevator cost? That kind of thing. Okay. Ultimately, it's the employer's responsibility to prove the existence of said hardship. So if they say they can't accommodate anything, we'll come back with, okay, why not specifically? Tell us why not. Okay. So I'm going to move on to, oh my gosh, we're getting close to noon. I'm just going to touch briefly on two notable decisions, just so you can see what we've done in the past. But before I go to that, does anybody have any more questions or comments about accommodation? I recognize that there may be issues, there may be questions that you don't want to voice publicly, and that's fine. You can contact the commission directly if you do, and we can answer your questions. When I'm in person, I typically stay behind for a while because there's usually one or two people that want to talk to me about something, but they don't want a group discussion about it. So if you've got a burning question, but you're a little bit nervous about bringing it up in this setting, we can talk about it later. Okay. All right, so two notable decisions. I'm not going to read all these bullet points because that's a lot of text. But essentially what had happened was Smitty's restaurant was, this poor waitress was experiencing sexual harassment for years, including gaslighting. And yeah, not only did Smitty's do nothing, but they also tried to diminish her feelings and her experiences. And so in the end, it was a rather sizable payout. They're not normally that large. And we also forced Smitty's to put in a sexual harassment policy. And finally, they had to take sexual harassment training, I think, for 3 years every year. So that kind of gives you an example of what, this was a pretty high profile case. It's all public now. That's why I'm allowed to talk about it. And actually, Kimberly Milligan wants people to talk about it. I can't remember my point, but anyway, yeah, it's a very public case, very big one. Shows you that there's sometimes money involved, usually almost always some kind of change being made. And I'll tell you, often an education session is part of the result. And those ones are not quite as fun as these ones, where people are here voluntarily. Okay, Laura King is another one. This is an example of some policy change. Essentially, they didn't consider schizophrenia a proper disability. And so Laura King was unable to get the support that she needed. And so we sort of fought for adding intellectual disabilities to the term disability. And actually, it also includes things like, now it includes things like, anxiety, ADD, addiction, things like that. So those are all considered disability now. So you can discriminate against people with some of those mental illnesses. Okay, so that's Laura King. Any questions about the Smitty's case or Laura King? Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up. If anything, I would like you to remember these points here. First of all and foremost, you can contact us at any time, even if you're not sure we're the right people to help you. We know a lot of the other organizations out there. We work with them a lot. We know who can do what. Sometimes what we do overlaps. That's okay. But we can send you in the right direction if we're not the right ones to help you. We're not here to punish. We are not, and we're not a person's lawyer. You're not hiring us to be your personal lawyer. You're hiring us as a facilitator. So in some cases, we actually advise people to get lawyers while they're working with us. The process can take a long time. And often if you have a lawyer, it can speed things up. So for example, a man came in not too long ago. He has brain cancer. He got fired from his job because he went to get a CT scan and forgot to notify anybody that he was going. And so because he was fired, he can't get EI right away. So this poor guy who's dealing with brain cancer, like you could see it, it was visible, now doesn't have any source of income. So now he's stressed about having cancer, but now he's also stressed about just buying groceries. And so in that case, I advise them you should get a lawyer as well, because you need this dealt with quickly, really, really quickly. You can't wait. We don't take sides. All we really care about is the law. We protect people in very specific situations, and we can't always help if somebody is just being mean. We wish we could. We really wish we could. All right, I've had it open for questions the whole time, but if anybody has any final ones, feel free to pop them in there. You can visit our website if you want more information. You can always phone. We try to encourage people to book an appointment with us. We're very, very busy. I'm in and out of the office all the time. You can't really expect to pop in and have like a one-on-one with staff here. You might be able to, but you can't really expect it. So I strongly encourage people to phone or email and set up an appointment with one of us first. So, okay, and make sure everyone's got a good chance to look at that. All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very
Shane.
much, guys, for listening to me talk. I hope I gave you something useful to take back with you. I do have a little bit more time, but I think most people are getting hungry for lunch.
Yep. I think I can make you a host so you can stick around a little bit if
Okay.
anyone wants to
Personally
ask
message.
specific questions.
Sure.
But just to wrap it up, thank you so much for speaking to us today. Thank you everyone for coming. We will be uploading this to our YouTube channel so everyone can access it afterwards. If you are a nonprofit organization, but you're not a member of the Community Sector Network, you can go to csnpi.com/join us. Our membership is free for volunteer-based organizations. And for upcoming webinars and events, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Community Sector Network of PEI. And that's all for today. Thank you, Sean, so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you too. And yeah, I'll stick around for a little bit if anyone has personal questions. I will say that